October 15th, 1944, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. When postal carrier Vera Holloway first saw the letter addressed to a dead man, she didn't know she was holding proof of a crime that had lasted 5 years. The envelope was ordinary, cream-colored government issue, addressed in the shaky handwriting of an elderly woman. The address read, __quote, _0 __. Vera had carried this type of envelope 58 times over her 5 years on the route. She knew the pattern by heart. First to Hawthorn Avenue to pick up the envelope from old Mrs. Mabel Kellenbach, then to Millvale Street to the Dunsworths, who claimed they forwarded everything to __quote, _1 __. A routine chain, nothing suspicious. Until Vera knocked on the wrong door. That October Friday, the sky over Pittsburgh hung heavy and gray, drizzling the kind of rain that seemed more like wet air than actual drops. Vera, 25 years old, lean and practical with honey brown hair pinned under her Postal Service cap, was rushing to finish her route early. Her leather satchel still held 30 letters, newspapers, and 3 packages. She climbed to the 3rd floor of the building at 8 Hawthorn Avenue, counted off the apartments, and knocked. The door opened to reveal Mabel Frances Kellenbach, a 73-year-old woman with soft white hair in a bun, wearing a faded floral house dress and worn slippers. Vera said, extending the envelope. The old woman took the envelope, glanced at the address, and suddenly went pale. Her face twisted, eyes widening in horror. Quote 4, she whispered, voice trembling. Quote 5. Vera was confused. The old woman stepped back, clutching the envelope to her chest. A chill ran down Vera's spine. She remembered. Usually she brought an empty envelope from Mrs. Kellenbach to Millvale Street, and the old woman would insert a letter and money into it. But today? Today, Vera had mistakenly brought back an old letter that should have already been on its way to San Diego. She'd mixed them up. And now, Mabel Kellenbach was holding her own letter, which should have reached her son 5 years ago. Vera began carefully. The old woman's voice cracked into a scream, tears filling her eyes. I don't have a son. My Teddy died 8 years ago. He's buried in Allegheny Cemetery. What are you talking about? The world tilted around Vera. She stood on the landing, gripping the cold metal railing, trying to understand what was happening. 8 years? Dead? But she'd been carrying letters for 5 years. Vera said slowly. The old woman swayed, grabbed the doorframe. Her face turned ashen as the rain-soaked street below. Quote 15. Quote, she breathed. Quote 16. Quote. Vera stood silent. She looked at Mabel Kellenbach and knew. The old woman was telling the truth. She genuinely didn't understand what Vera was talking about. She genuinely didn't know the Dunsworth family. She genuinely believed her son was dead. But then, who had been giving Vera letters and money for San Diego for 5 years? Who had been signing in place of Mabel Kellenbach? And most importantly, why? Vera asked quietly. Mabel Kellenbach silently stepped aside. Vera entered the small one-room apartment that smelled of age, medicine, and loneliness. A bed with a faded coverlet stood in the corner, a table piled with newspapers by the window, icons and photographs on the wall. Vera stopped before the photographs. A young man in army uniform, smiling, with dark hair and kind eyes. The same photo in a mourning frame. Dates, 1904 to 1936. Theodore Ambrose Kellenbach. Dead 8 years. Vera slowly sank into a chair. Mabel Kellenbach sat opposite, clutching the envelope. __quote _19 _ Vera requested __quote _20 __. The old woman closed her eyes. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but firm. Vera repeated. Mabel nodded. Vera felt cold anger ignite inside her. She remembered the Dunsworth family, Orton Dunsworth, a 62-year-old man with a receding hairline and permanently sour expression. His daughter, Opal Frances, a 40-year-old woman with hard features and cold eyes. Opal, Theodore's wife, Lowell's mother. Vera said slowly. The old woman flinched. Mabel Kellenbach went even paler. Vera confirmed. Silence. Only the ticking of an old clock on the wall. Mabel Kellenbach sat motionless, tears streaming down her face. She whispered. Vera opened her postal satchel and pulled out the routing log. She flipped through pages from the last 5 years and found the entries. Every month. Letter from Mabel Frances Kellenbach, residing at Hawthorn Avenue, Building 8, Apartment 14, addressed to the Dunsworth for forwarding to Theodore Ambrose Kellenbach in San Diego. Each time, the sender's signature. Vera showed the entries to Mabel Kellenbach. Is this your signature? The old woman studied the log for a long time, then shook her head. No, that's not my signature. It looks similar, but it's not mine. My hands shake. I always smudge the ink. But this, it's steady. This isn't me. So someone was forging your signature, Vera said slowly. Someone was pretending to be you, sending letters and money in your name to the Dunsworths, who pretended they were forwarding everything to your dead son. Why? Mabel Kellenbach's voice broke. Vera answered shortly. Mabel Kellenbach thought. Vera quickly calculated. $22 a month, 12 months a year, 5 years. That was $1,320, a fortune for a widow living on government assistance. Vera said carefully. The old woman shook her head. Vera clarified. Mabel stared at her. Vera stood and walked to the window. Outside, rain continued to fall. Workers were returning from the steel mills, their faces tired and gray. Streetcars rattled along the tracks. Somewhere, a radio played Glenn Miller. A normal October day in wartime Pittsburgh. Except nothing was normal about this. Vera turned around, quote 53, quote 54, quote 55, quote 56, quote 57, the old woman thought. Quote 58. She stopped mid-sentence. Her face went white. Vera pressed. Mabel whispered. The room seemed to freeze. Vera felt her heart pounding. Quote 65, quote 66. Mabel shook her head frantically. Quote 67, quote 68, quote 69, quote 70, quote 71. Vera felt sick. She saw it all now, the whole scheme, crystal clear. The old woman blinked. Mabel stood slowly, went to a small wooden box on top of the dresser. She pulled out a yellowed document. Vera read it. Widow's pension. $42 per month. Effective January 1932. You see? Vera showed her. It says $42, not $20. Mabel stared at the paper. Her hands began to shake. But Nurse Graves always said it was $20. She said the government reduced it because of the war effort. She said everyone's pensions were cut. That's not true. Your pension has always been $42, which means for the last 3 years, she's been stealing $22 every month. Before that, she must have found another way. But how? I don't understand. Before she started cashing my checks, I went to the bank myself. I saw the money. I counted it. Before 3 years ago, Vera said carefully, did you keep your pension money somewhere? A jar? A drawer? Yes. I kept it in a tin box under my mattress, just until I could pay my bills. And did Nurse Graves ever come into your bedroom? Mabel thought back. Yes. She would check my blood pressure while I sat on the bed. She would look in my medicine cabinet, make sure I had my pills. She was very thorough. So she would have known where you kept your money. Are you saying she was stealing from my tin box? And then, When you started having trouble walking, she convinced you to let her cash your checks, so she could steal more efficiently. Mabel sank back into her chair. She looked 10 years older, face gray with shock. But why? Why would she do this to me? Because you're alone, because you trusted her, because she knew you had no one to notice the missing money. And the letters? The letters to Teddy? Vera took a breath. I think she was creating a trail, making it look like you were sending money to your son. That way, if anyone ever questioned where your pension money was going, there would be a paper record. Oh, Mrs. Kellenbach sends it to her son in San Diego. No one would investigate further. But Teddy is dead. Anyone could check. Who would check? You're an old woman living alone. No family. No friends who visit regularly. Who would question your affairs? Mabel began to cry. Silent, hopeless tears. I thought she was kind. I thought she cared about me. She was the only person who visited. The only one who remembered I existed. Vera knelt beside the old woman's chair and took her hand. Quote, 97. Quote, 98. Quote, 99. The old woman wiped her eyes. Quote, 100. Quote, 101. Quote, 102. Quote, 103. Mabel looked at Vera, this young postal carrier she barely knew, who had stumbled onto a crime by accident, who was now promising justice. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 104, underscore, underscore. Vera thought about that, about all the lonely people on her route, all the old folks who waited by their mailboxes for a letter, a newspaper, any connection to the outside world, all the invisible people that society had forgotten. Quote, 105. Quote, she said quietly. Quote, 106. Quote. Mabel squeezed Vera's hand. Thank you. Vera left the apartment and walked down the stairs into the rainy afternoon. Her route was still unfinished, but she couldn't think about that now. She needed to go to Millvale Street. She needed to see the Dunsworths. She needed to confirm her suspicions. She walked 6 blocks through the rain, past row houses and corner stores and factory gates. The war posters were everywhere. Quote 108, quote 109, quote 110. She passed women in factory overalls coming home from their shifts at the munitions plants, old men reading newspapers in doorways, children playing stickball in alleys. Normal life in wartime America. Except nothing felt normal anymore. Millvale Street, Building 12, Apartment 5. Vera had been here dozens of times. She'd delivered letters, packages, War Department telegrams. She knew the Dunsworths by sight. The father, Orton, surly and silent. The daughter, Opal, cold and efficient. They'd always been polite, but distant. Never invited her in for coffee like some of her other customers. Never chatted about the war or the weather. Just took their mail and closed the door. Vera climbed the stairs and knocked. Footsteps. The door opened. Opal Dunsworth stood there, wearing a house dress and apron. Her dark hair was pulled back severely. Her eyes were flat and expressionless. Vera held up the envelope she'd shown Mabel Kellenbach. This letter. It's addressed to you for forwarding to Theodore Kellenbach in San Diego. But I spoke with Mrs. Kellenbach today, and she says her son died 8 years ago. So I'm wondering, who exactly are you forwarding these letters to? For a long moment, Opal Dunsworth said nothing. Her face remained expressionless. Then, very slowly, she smiled. It was the coldest smile Vera had ever seen. I think you should mind your own business, Miss Holloway. Delivering mail is my business, and fraud is everyone's business. The smile vanished. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. I think you've been pretending to be Mabel Kellenbach for 5 years. I think you've been forging her signature on letters. I think you've been stealing from her pension. And I think you've been telling her that her dead son is alive and well in San Diego. Opal's jaw tightened. Quote, 119. quote, 120, quote, 121, quote, 122. Opal stepped forward, her voice dropping to a hiss. Quote, 123, quote, 124, quote, 125, quote, 126. Vera asked suddenly. Opal blinked. Quote, 128, quote, 130. For the first time, Opal's face showed emotion. Fear. He's at school. Which school? That's not your concern. Is he even here, or did you abandon him somewhere? Put him in an orphanage so you wouldn't have to spend your stolen money on him? Get out! Opal screamed. Get out of my house right now, or I swear to God. You swear what? You'll hurt me? Go ahead. Add assault to your list of crimes. Behind Opal, a man appeared. Orton Dunsworth. Tall, thin, with watery eyes and trembling hands. He looked at Vera, then at his daughter. Opal, what's going on? Nothing, Father. This postal worker is leaving. She knows, Orton said flatly. Doesn't she? She figured it out. Shut up. We should never have done this. I told you. I said it would come back to haunt us. I said, shut up. Orton ignored her. He looked at Vera with something like relief in his eyes. She's been doing it for 5 years. Ever since we found out old Mabel lived in the building on Hawthorn. Opal recognized her from the funeral. Realized Mabel thought we'd moved to Ohio. So she started the scheme. Dressed up as a county nurse. Visited Mabel on pension days. First, she stole cash from Mabel's tin box. Then she convinced Mabel to let her cash the checks. Kept half the money. Told Mabel the pension had been reduced. Made up stories about Teddy being alive in San Diego. Wrote fake letters from him. You bastard! Opal whirled on her father. You were in on it too. You took your share. $5 a month, Orton said bitterly. 5 lousy dollars to keep quiet while you stole from my dead son-in-law's mother. Yes, I took it. And I've regretted it every day since. Vera looked between them. Father and daughter. Conspirators. Thieves. Where's Lowell? She asked again. Orton looked at the floor. St. Vincent's Home for Boys. In Garfield. She put him there in 1938. Told the orphanage she was a destitute widow with no family to help her. They took the boy in. The state pays for his care. While you steal his grandmother's money, Vera said. Money that could have supported him. Money that could have kept him with family. Opal laughed bitterly. Family? That old bat never cared about Lowell. She blamed me for Teddy's death. Said I distracted him, made him work too hard, caused the accident. She never wanted me in the family. When Teddy died, she didn't even cry at the funeral. She just stood there like a statue. Cold. Heartless. So you punished her by stealing her pension and lying about her son being alive? And you punished your own child by abandoning him in an orphanage while you lived off stolen money? I survived. That's what I did. I survived. Vera had heard enough. She turned and walked down the stairs. Behind her, Opal screamed after her. You can't prove anything. It's her word against mine. She's an old, senile woman. No one will believe you. But Vera already had a plan. The next day, Saturday, Vera went to the main post office downtown. She found her supervisor, Harrison McCready, a 50-year-old man with gray hair and tired eyes. She explained everything. The forged signatures, the stolen money, the fake nurse, the boy in the orphanage. McCready listened without interrupting. When Vera finished, he sat back and whistled low. That's some story, Holloway. It's all true. I can show you the routing logs. I can take you to Mrs. Kellenbach. I believe you. But here's the problem. This isn't really a postal matter. It's fraud. It's theft. It's forgery. This needs to go to the police. Will they investigate? Or will they say it's just a family dispute? McCready frowned. Depends on the detective. Some would take it seriously. Others would brush it off. Old lady, pension money, family drama, they might say it's a civil matter. But it's not. It's criminal. You and I know that, but we need evidence, solid evidence, something that proves Opal Dunsworth was forging signatures and stealing money. I have the routing logs. That shows deliveries, not theft. What about the pension checks? If Opal was cashing them, there would be bank records. We'd need a warrant to get those. And to get a warrant, we need probable cause, which means we need more than just your suspicions. Vera thought hard. What if we caught her in the act? How? November 1st. That's when she comes to visit Mrs. Kellenbach as the nurse. What if we were there? What if we witnessed her taking the pension check and giving back only $20 instead of $42? That would be proof. McCready considered. It might work. But we'd need the police on board. We can't just burst in and make a citizen's arrest. Can you call Detective Shaw? He helped us with that ration book fraud last year. He knows postal fraud cases. Shaw's in the Army now, shipped out in June. But I can try his replacement, guy named Kowalski, supposed to be sharp. Can you call him today? It's Saturday, Holloway. He's probably home with his family. This is important. McCready sighed. All right, I'll try, but no promises. He called. Detective Leonard Kowalski answered on the third ring. McCready explained the situation. There was a long pause. Then Kowalski said he'd meet them Monday morning at the post office. Monday, October 18th. Vera, McCready, and Detective Kowalski sat in a small conference room at the main post office. Kowalski was about 35, stocky, with dark hair and sharp eyes. He listened to Vera's account, examined the routing logs, nodded thoughtfully. This is good work, Miss Holloway, he said. But it's circumstantial. We need to catch her red-handed. You say she comes November 1st? That's right, the same day the pension check arrives. And you think she'll take the check, claim she's cashing it for Mrs. Kellenbach, then return only part of the money? That's been her pattern for 3 years. All right, here's what we'll do. On November 1st, I'll be in Mrs. Kellenbach's apartment. Hidden. When Opal shows up, I'll observe what happens. If she commits fraud, I'll arrest her on the spot. We'll also need to coordinate with the bank. Find out if she's been cashing checks in Mrs. Kellenbach's name. What about Mrs. Kellenbach? She's elderly. This could be traumatic for her. We'll prepare her, explain what's happening. Make sure she understands she's helping catch a thief, not being investigated herself. And what about the boy? Lowell. Kowalski's expression softened. __quote _188 __. The next 2 weeks crawled by. Vera continued her route, delivering mail, avoiding Millvale Street. She visited Mabel Kellenbach several times, bringing groceries, chatting, preparing her for November 1st. The old woman was frightened but determined. Quote, 189, quote, she said firmly. Quote, 190, quote. Quote, 191, quote. Vera agreed. Quote, 192, quote. Detective Kowalski also visited Mabel, explaining the plan, reassuring her that she wasn't in trouble. He brought another officer with him, a policewoman named Dorothy Chen, who would be hiding in the bedroom closet with him to serve as a witness. We need to make sure this is airtight, Kowalski explained. Defense lawyers love to claim entrapment or illegal search, but if we're invited into your home, Mrs. Kellenbach, and we witness a crime in progress, that's legitimate. Mabel nodded, wringing her hands. Will I have to testify? In court? Probably, but we'll be with you every step of the way. November 1st arrived cold and gray. Vera delivered the pension check to Mabel's apartment at 9 in the morning. Detective Kowalski and Officer Chen were already there, hidden in the bedroom closet. Vera positioned herself in the hallway outside, pretending to sort mail. At 10 o'clock, there was a knock. Mabel opened the door, her hand trembling slightly. Opal Dunsworth stood there, dressed in a crisp white nurse's uniform, carrying a medical bag and wearing a professional smile. Quote, 197, quote, she said warmly. Quote, 198, quote. Quote, 199, quote. Quote, 200, quote. Opal entered. She set her bag on the table and pulled out a blood pressure cuff. She wrapped it around Mabel's arm, pumped it up, read the gauge. 140/90, a bit high. Are you taking your medication? Yes, every morning. Good. Now, let's check your pulse. She went through the routine. Pulse, temperature, breathing. All very professional. All very convincing. Then she pulled out a clipboard and made a few notes. Now, Mrs. Kellenbach, did your pension check arrive today? Mabel nodded, her voice barely steady. Yes, the postal carrier brought it this morning. Wonderful. May I have it? I'll take it to the bank and cash it for you, just like always. Mabel reached into her house dress pocket and pulled out the government envelope. Inside was a check for $42, made out to Mabel F. Kellenbach. She handed it to Opal with shaking hands. Opal opened the envelope, glanced at the check, and smiled. Perfect. I'll be back in about an hour with your money. $20, as always. Wait, Mabel said, her voice thin and frightened. The check. How much is it for? Opal looked at her with practiced sympathy. $20, dear. Same as always. The war reduction, remember? All pensions were cut to support our boys overseas. But I thought it might be more. No, dear, it's been $20 for years now. You know that. She tucked the check into her purse and stood to leave. Detective Kowalski stepped out of the bedroom. Actually, Mrs. Dunsworth, that check is for $42, not $20. Opal spun around, her face going white. The medical bag slipped from her hand and hit the floor with a thud. What? Who are you? Kowalski showed his badge. Detective Leonard Kowalski, Pittsburgh Police. I've been observing your visit. You just told Mrs. Kellenbach that her pension check is for $20, but we both know it's for $42. You were planning to cash it, keep the difference, and return only $20 to Mrs. Kellenbach. That's theft. That's fraud. And you've been doing it for 3 years. Officer Chen emerged from the closet as well, notebook in hand. I witnessed the entire exchange, Detective. She clearly stated the check was for $20 when she knew it was for $42. Opal's eyes darted between them, calculating. Then she forced a laugh. Kowalski held out his hand. Opal clutched her purse tighter. For a moment, it looked like Opal might run. Her body tensed, her eyes flicked toward the door. But Officer Chen was blocking it. Slowly, reluctantly, Opal opened her purse and pulled out the check. She handed it to Kowalski. He examined it carefully. Opal said nothing. He pulled out handcuffs. Opal's composure finally cracked. No, you don't understand. I needed that money. I have a son to support. Your son, Kowalski said coldly, is in St. Vincent's orphanage. You abandoned him there 6 years ago. So don't pretend this was about supporting him. Opal's face went slack with shock. Quote 232. Quote 233. He cuffed her hands behind her back. Opal started to cry, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of fury and frustration. That old woman never cared about me. She never wanted me in the family. She blamed me for Teddy's death. Why should I care about her? Mabel, who had been sitting silent through all of this, finally spoke. Her voice was quiet but firm. I never blamed you for Teddy's death. It was an accident. But I do blame you for lying to me for 5 years, for stealing from me, for keeping my grandson away from me, for making me believe my son was still alive when you knew he was dead. That's unforgivable. Opal spat back. "You're a fool, old woman. You wanted to believe Teddy was alive. You practically begged me to lie to you." "I never knew you were lying," Mabel said. "I thought you'd moved to Ohio. I didn't even know you were in Pittsburgh." "Well, now you do. And I hope you enjoy your precious $42 a month. It won't bring Teddy back. It won't give you back the years you lost with Lowell. You're still alone. You're still a pathetic old woman with nothing." Kowalski tightened his grip on Opal's arm. __quote _240 ___. As they led Opal out, Vera entered the apartment. Mabel was sitting in her chair, trembling. Vera sat beside her and took her hand. Vera said gently, Mabel whispered. Mabel looked at Vera with red-rimmed eyes. Vera thought about that. Vera smiled sadly. Detective Kowalski worked quickly over the next week. He obtained a warrant for Opal's bank records and found exactly what he expected. 3 years of pension checks cashed in Mabel Kellenbach's name with Opal's signature on the deposit slips. The bank teller identified Opal from a photograph as the woman who regularly came in to cash her mother-in-law's checks. The teller had never questioned it. Opal always seemed professional, always had the checks properly endorsed. Except the endorsements were forged, Kowalski explained to Vera when they met at the post office to review the evidence. We had a handwriting expert compare the signatures on the checks to Mabel's actual signature. They don't match. Opal was forging them. How did she learn to forge Mabel's signature? Practice. We searched her apartment and found a notebook with pages and pages of signature practice. She'd been working on it for years. Started back in 1939 from what we can tell. Kowalski spread the evidence across the table. Vera looked at the pages of practice signatures, each one getting closer to Mabel's shaky handwriting. It was meticulous, methodical, disturbing in its calculation. Kowalski continued. Vera felt sick. The cruelty of it was staggering. To give a grieving mother false hope, year after year, while stealing her money. Quote, 265, quote, she asked. Quote, 266, quote. Quote, 267, quote. Kowalski explained. Quote, 268, quote. Quote, 269, quote. Quote, 270, quote. He also interviewed Orton Dunsworth, who broke down almost immediately. The old man confessed everything. How Opal had discovered Mabel living on Hawthorn Avenue, how she'd concocted the nurse scheme, how she'd stolen cash from Mabel's tin box before convincing her to hand over the pension checks. I tried to stop her at first, Orton said, wringing his hands. I told her it was wrong, but she said we needed the money, and she offered me $5 a month to keep quiet. God help me, I took it. I took blood money from my dead son-in-law's mother. Did you know about the fake letters, Kowalski asked? The ones pretending Teddy was alive? Yes, Opal wrote them herself. She'd put them in envelopes addressed from San Diego and give them to the postal carrier to deliver to Mabel. Made it look like Teddy was writing to his mother. It was cruel. But Opal said it gave the old woman hope. Hope built on lies. I know. I know it was wrong. I should have stopped it. I should have gone to the police. But I was weak and greedy. And now I have to live with that. Kowalski also visited St. Vincent's Home for Boys and spoke with the director, Sister Margaret. She pulled Lowell's file and confirmed what Orton had said. Mrs. Dunsworth brought the boy here in September 1938, Sister Margaret explained. She said she was a widow with no means of support, no family to help her. She said the boy's father had died and his grandmother had also passed away. She seemed genuinely distraught. We had no reason to doubt her story. Did she ever visit him? Send money? Write letters? No. She signed the papers relinquishing custody and we never heard from her again. The state provides funding for the children's care, so we didn't pursue her for support. And the boy? How has he been? Sister Margaret's face softened. quote, 283 quote, 284 Sister Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Then that boy has been carrying unnecessary grief for 6 years. And that woman who called herself his mother deserves whatever punishment the law can give her. On November 10th, Detective Kowalski arranged a meeting at the police station. He brought Lowell from the orphanage and Mabel from her apartment. Vera was there too, standing quietly in the corner. When Lowell walked into the small office, Mabel gasped. The boy was 12 years old now, tall for his age, with dark hair and serious eyes. He looked so much like Teddy at that age. Same shy expression, same gentle demeanor. Lowell looked at the old woman and frowned, confused. Sister Margaret said someone wanted to see me. Are you from the county? Am I being moved to a different home? Mabel stood slowly, her legs shaking. Lowell? Do you remember me? The boy studied her face. A flicker of something, recognition, uncertainty, crossed his features. I don't know. Should I? I'm your grandmother, your father's mother, Mabel Kellenbach. Lowell stared at her, his young face showing shock. But my mother said you died. She said you died right after my father did. Your mother lied, sweetheart. I've been alive this whole time. I've been living right here in Pittsburgh. I never knew where you were. Your mother told me she was taking you to Ohio. She said you'd be better off away from here. I tried to write to her, but the letters came back. I thought I'd lost you forever. You didn't know I was at St. Vincent's? Not until last week. A very brave postal carrier discovered what your mother had been doing. She found out your mother had lied to both of us. Lowell turned to look at Vera, who gave him a small smile. The boy's eyes filled with tears. Mabel crossed the room and knelt in front of him, taking his hands in hers. Lowell looked at Detective Kowalski. Kowalski explained. Lowell absorbed this information. He didn't look sad about his mother going to jail. He looked relieved. She was never very kind to me, he said quietly. Even before she took me to the orphanage, she would get angry over small things. She'd lock me in my room for hours. Sometimes she'd forget to feed me. I was afraid of her. Mabel's face contorted with grief and rage. Quote, 305 quote, 306 quote, 307 Lowell looked at this old woman he barely remembered. This stranger who claimed to be family. This grandmother who promised love. Mabel smiled through her tears. Lowell's tears spilled over. I don't remember him. I was only 4 when he died. Then I'll help you remember. I have photographs. I have his things, his baseball glove, his books, his letters from the war. I'll share all of it with you. You'll know your father, Lowell. I promise you that. The boy stepped forward into Mabel's embrace. She wrapped her arms around him and held him tight, this grandson she'd thought lost forever. They stood there together, crying, while Kowalski and Vera looked on. This is what it's all about, Kowalski said quietly to Vera. This moment right here. This is why we do this job. Vera nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The trial of Opal Dunsworth took place in January 1945. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. Forged signatures on pension checks, bank records showing 3 years of theft, testimony from Mabel Kellenbach, testimony from Orton Dunsworth, testimony from the bank teller, and the handwriting analysis proving forgery. Opal's defense attorney tried to argue that she'd been acting in Mabel's best interests, that the old woman was senile and needed help managing her finances. But when Mabel took the stand and testified clearly and competently about the deception, that argument fell apart. The prosecutor also charged Opal with child abandonment and providing false information to a state institution. Opal had told St. Vincent's that Lowell had no living relatives, which was a lie. She'd deprived him of his grandmother and deprived Mabel of her grandson. On January 22, 1945, the jury deliberated for 4 hours. They found Opal Dunsworth guilty on all counts: fraud, theft, forgery, exploitation of an elderly person, child abandonment, and making false statements. The judge showed no mercy. __quote _316 __. He sentenced her to 7 years in the Women's State Penitentiary, with no possibility of early parole. Orton Dunsworth received a lighter sentence due to his cooperation: 2 years probation and an order to repay his portion of the stolen money. Lowell Kellenbach was released to Mabel's custody on January 30, 1945. The court hearing was brief but emotional. The judge looked at the grandmother and grandson standing before him and smiled. Mabel and Lowell left the courthouse hand in hand. Vera was waiting outside for them, along with Detective Kowalski. Vera said, embracing Mabel. Mabel whispered. They took the streetcar back to Hawthorn Avenue. Lowell was quiet during the ride, looking out the window at the snowy Pittsburgh streets. Mabel held his hand, afraid to let go, afraid this was all a dream. When they arrived at the apartment, Lowell stood in the doorway and looked around. It was small, just 2 rooms now that Mabel had moved to a larger place, but it was clean and warm and filled with light. Mabel said. She showed him the second bedroom. It had a bed with a blue quilt, a small desk, a bookshelf with a few books. On the wall hung a framed photograph of Teddy in his army uniform. Mabel said softly. Lowell stared at the photograph. He tried to remember his father, but the memories were hazy, fragmentary. A voice reading bedtime stories, strong hands tossing him in the air, the smell of aftershave. Nothing solid, nothing he could hold on to. Lowell said. Over the following weeks, Mabel kept that promise. Every evening after dinner, they'd sit together and she'd tell him about Teddy, how he'd built a treehouse in the backyard when he was 10, how he'd won the spelling bee in 6th grade, how he'd worked 3 jobs to save money for his wedding, how he'd cried tears of joy when Lowell was born. Slowly, Lowell began to understand who his father had been, not just a face in a photograph, but a real person with dreams and fears and love. The adjustment wasn't always easy. Lowell had spent 6 years in the orphanage, living by strict rules, sleeping in a dormitory with 20 other boys. Now he had his own room, his own space, his own freedom. Sometimes it felt overwhelming, and sometimes the memories of his mother surfaced, the anger, the neglect, the locked doors. He'd wake up at night in a panic, thinking he was back in that dark apartment, alone and afraid. But Mabel was always there. She'd hear him cry out, come into his room, sit on the edge of his bed and stroke his hair until he calmed down. You're safe now, she'd whisper. __quote _329 __. Gradually, the nightmares faded. Lowell started to smile more, laugh more, trust more. He made friends at his new school. He joined the baseball team, his father's sport. He discovered he loved to read, just like Teddy had. And every Sunday, Mabel would take him to Allegheny Cemetery. They'd visit Teddy's grave, bring flowers, sit on the bench nearby and talk. Your father would be so proud of you, Mabel would say. You're becoming such a fine young man. Do you think he can see me? From wherever he is? I believe he can. And I believe he's smiling. Vera continued her postal route, but now, when she delivered letters to Hawthorn Avenue, Building 8, Apartment 14, the door opened to a smiling boy who called her Miss Vera and thanked her for saving his family. Mabel always invited her in for coffee. They'd sit at the kitchen table, the 3 of them, and talk about ordinary things: school, weather, war news, neighborhood gossip. She watched the boy blossom under his grandmother's love, his sadness fading, his smile returning, his confidence growing. She attended his 8th grade graduation in 1946, his high school graduation in 1950. She gave him a fountain pen as a graduation gift with an inscription, Write your own story. Make it a good one. Lowell kept that pen his entire life. He used it to write letters to Mabel when he was in the Air Force. He used it to sign his marriage certificate in 1957. He used it to write in his daily journal, recording his thoughts and experiences as a postal carrier. Vera never married, never had children of her own. But she had her route, her customers, her purpose. And she had the Kellenbachs, her chosen family, the people she'd saved and who had, in turn, given her life meaning. When Mabel grew too frail to cook, Vera would bring casseroles. When Lowell was overseas with the Air Force, Vera would sit with Mabel and read his letters aloud, both of them laughing at his descriptions of military life. In 1952, Vera was honored by the Pittsburgh Post Office for 25 years of service. Mabel and Lowell attended the ceremony, sitting in the front row, applauding loudly when Vera's name was called. "This woman," the postmaster said, "represents the very best of the Postal Service. She doesn't just deliver mail, she delivers care, attention, and justice to the people on her route. We're proud to have her on our team." After the ceremony, Mabel hugged Vera tightly. "You deserve every bit of that recognition," she said. "You changed our lives." "You changed mine too," Vera replied. "You showed me why this job matters." Vera retired from the Postal Service in 1964 at age 45, taking early retirement due to chronic back pain from years of carrying heavy mail bags. She moved to a small house on the north side and spent her days gardening, reading, and volunteering at the local library. But she never lost touch with the Kellenbachs. She came to Lowell's wedding in 1957, held baby Linda at her baptism in 1963, attended every birthday party. She became __quote_342_ to Lowell's daughters, the honorary family member who always brought the best presents. One afternoon in March 1945, Vera brought a letter for Lowell. It was from the War Department. Mabel's face went white when she saw the envelope. __quote_343___, she whispered. __quote_344___. But when Lowell opened it, he found not a death notification, but a commendation. The letter explained that Theodore Ambrose Kellenbach had been posthumously awarded the Silver Star for valor in World War I. The medal would be presented to his family at a ceremony in April. Mabel wept. After all these years, Teddy was being honored, recognized, remembered. Quote, 345, quote, she asked Vera. Quote, 346, quote, 347, quote. On April 10, 1945, 9 years to the day after Teddy's funeral, Mabel and Lowell stood in a small ceremony room at Fort Pitt. A general pinned the Silver Star to a velvet cushion and presented it to Mabel. "Your son served with distinction," he said. "His courage in the face of enemy fire saved the lives of 6 men. The nation is grateful." Mabel held the medal and thought about her boy, her brave, kind, gentle boy, who'd survived one war only to die on a Pennsylvania highway. She wished he could see this, wished he could know his sacrifice was remembered, wished he could see his son, standing tall and proud, carrying on the Kellenbach name. After the ceremony, they visited Allegheny Cemetery. Lowell placed the medal on his father's grave. "I'm proud of you, Dad," he said quietly. "And I'll make you proud too. I promise." Vera stood back, giving them privacy. She thought about all the paths her life could have taken. She could have ignored that mixed-up letter, could have let the scheme continue, could have told herself it wasn't her problem. But she hadn't. She'd pursued the truth. She'd helped a family reunite. She'd delivered justice along with the mail. The war in Europe ended in May. The war in the Pacific ended in August. Soldiers came home. Factories retooled for peacetime production. Life slowly returned to normal. But for Mabel and Lowell Kellenbach, normal was something new. They'd never had this before, this quiet, steady, loving family life. They cherished it. Lowell graduated high school in 1950. He joined the Air Force, served 4 years, came home to Pittsburgh. Mabel was in her 80s by then, frail but sharp-minded. Lowell got a job with the post office, inspired by Vera Holloway, who'd saved his childhood. He walked the same routes she'd once walked, delivered letters to the same addresses. And he remembered. When someone seemed lonely, he stopped to chat. When someone seemed confused about a government form, he helped them read it. When something seemed suspicious, a letter addressed to a dead person, a signature that didn't match, a pattern of unusual mail, he investigated. Because he remembered what happened when postal workers didn't pay attention, he remembered the cost of indifference. In 1955, Lowell uncovered a scheme similar to his mother's. An elderly man receiving, quote, $352 from a deceased daughter, money disappearing from his bank account, a fake social worker collecting, quote, $353. Lowell brought it to the police. The scheme was shut down. The old man was reunited with his actual daughter, who'd been searching for him for years. The case made the local newspapers. Postal carrier exposes fraud against elderly man, the headline read. Reporters interviewed Lowell, asking how he'd spotted the scheme. He said simply. After that case, Lowell's reputation grew. Elderly people on his route began to trust him implicitly. They'd confide in him about strange phone calls, suspicious visitors, confusing financial documents. He became not just their postal carrier, but their advocate, their protector. In 1958, he helped an elderly widow avoid a real estate scam, someone trying to pressure her into selling her house far below market value. In 1961, he identified a fake census worker who was stealing Social Security numbers. In 1965, he stopped a grandson from forging his grandmother's will. Each time, Lowell worked carefully, methodically. He gathered evidence, consulted with authorities, made sure his accusations were solid before he acted. He never rushed to judgment, never assumed guilt without proof. But when he was certain a crime was being committed, he never looked away. When reporters asked Lowell why he was so vigilant, he always gave the same answer. Because a postal carrier once saved my life. She noticed something wrong, and she didn't look away. She taught me that delivering mail isn't just about carrying envelopes, it's about connecting people, protecting people, caring about the stories behind the addresses. His supervisors at the post office noticed his dedication. In 1970, they offered him a promotion to supervisor, but he declined. He wanted to stay on the streets, stay connected to the people on his route. I can do more good out here, he explained. In an office, I'm just pushing paper. Out here, I'm helping people. But by 1975, his knees were giving out from years of walking. The doctors told him he needed to reduce his mileage or risk permanent damage. Reluctantly, Lowell accepted the promotion to supervisor. It meant a desk job, overseeing other carriers, managing routes and schedules. He hated leaving the streets, but he found a new purpose in training the next generation. He taught young postal carriers what Vera had taught him, to pay attention, to care, to see people not just as addresses but as human beings with stories and struggles. Mabel Kellenbach died peacefully in her sleep in 1960 at age 89. She was buried next to her husband and son in Allegheny Cemetery. Lowell stood at the grave and thought about the 8 years they'd lost, the 8 years Opal had stolen. But he also thought about the 15 years they'd had together, the years of Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings and birthday cakes, the years of laughter and stories and love. Opal had stolen 8 years, but Vera Holloway had given them 15. At the funeral, Vera stood beside Lowell. She was 56 now, gray-haired and weathered, still delivering mail in Pittsburgh. She'd never married, never had children. Her route was her life. Her customers were her family, Lowell said. Vera smiled. They stood in silence. Then Lowell said, Vera said, Lowell worked as a postal carrier for 21 years. In 1975, at age 43, he was promoted to supervisor. At his promotion ceremony, his colleagues gave him a plaque, underscore underscore quote underscore 374 underscore underscore. Vera came to the ceremony. She was 76 now, long retired, living in a small house on the north side. She hugged Lowell and said, quote, 375, quote, 376, quote, 377, quote, 378. Vera laughed, quote, 379, quote, 380. That night, Lowell went home to his wife and 2 daughters. He told them the story again, the one they'd heard 100 times but never tired of hearing. The story of the postal carrier who noticed, who cared, who saved him. Remember that, he told his daughters. Remember that paying attention matters. Caring matters. One person who refuses to look away can change everything. His younger daughter, 12 years old, asked, "Do you think I could be a postal carrier someday?" Lowell smiled. "You could be anything you want. But if you choose that path, if you choose to carry messages for people, then carry them with care. Carry them with attention. Carry them with love. Because you're not just delivering mail, you're delivering lives." And that's what she did. 30 years later, in 2005, Linda Kellenbach walked the same Pittsburgh streets her father had walked, the same streets her great-grandmother had walked, the same streets Vera Holloway had walked 60 years earlier. She delivered letters and packages and messages, and she paid attention. Always. Because she remembered the story of letters from a dead son, the story of a boy stolen by lies and saved by truth, the story of a postal carrier who changed everything by simply paying attention. And she carried that story forward. Just like her father, just like Vera, just like all the postal carriers who understood their job wasn't just about moving paper, it was about moving hearts, connecting souls, delivering hope. One envelope at a time, one knock at a time, one act of attention at a time. Because in the end, that's all it takes to change the world. One person who notices, one person who cares, one person who refuses to look away. That was the legacy of Mabel Kellenbach, of Teddy Kellenbach, of Lowell Kellenbach, of Vera Holloway. That was the lesson that echoed through generations. Pay attention, care deeply, act bravely, and deliver not just mail, but justice, truth, and love. Opal Dunsworth was released from prison in 1952 after serving 7 years. She returned to Pittsburgh, but no one would hire her. Her name was infamous, the woman who'd robbed her own mother-in-law, who'd abandoned her son, who'd built a 5-year fraud on lies and greed. She worked odd jobs, lived in boarding houses, drank heavily. In 1958, she was found dead in a cheap hotel room. Heart attack. She was 54 years old. Lowell didn't attend her funeral. He felt no grief, no anger, just a distant sadness that someone could waste their life on cruelty when they could have chosen love. Orton Dunsworth died in 1952, just months after Opal's release. Heart failure. He'd spent his last years alone, estranged from his daughter, haunted by his complicity in her crimes. But Mabel's legacy lived on. Every time Lowell helped an elderly person with their mail, every time he noticed something wrong and spoke up, every time he chose compassion over indifference, he was carrying her forward, carrying Teddy forward, carrying Vera's lesson forward. And when Linda Kellenbach walked her postal route in 2005, she carried them all forward. 3 generations of caring, 3 generations of paying attention, 3 generations of understanding that delivering mail was about more than envelopes. It was about delivering hope, truth, and human connection to people who needed it most. The story lived on. The lesson endured. Pay attention. Care deeply. Act bravely. Because one person who notices can change everything.